There is nothing better than some November opportunities to invest in new stocks. And that's exactly what we're going to do on the podcast daily, because it's Wednesday and it's Stonk Day. That's Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. Got to look at some new schemes, some new players involved, a bunch of reps to evaluate, and that blowout win over Purdue. So that is when you start writing some checks and you wait for the money to roll in. Where should we begin, Bill?
I will begin with buying some stock in the idea of maybe the running backs generally, but I think Treveyon Henderson more specifically being a continued sort of additive piece in the passing game for Ohio State. I thought it was interesting the way that Will Howard and Chip Kelly were talking about Treveyon on Tuesday. One, that how much they had worked on that one rep where he like cooked the linebacker and man coverage got vertical, and Will hit him for a nice completion there. I don't know how often teams will play man coverage with a linebacker on Treveyon. Not only did
It's
Purdue
disrespectful.
not only was it a linebacker, Kydron Jenkins is a defensive lineman who Purdue moved to linebacker. So like that is not the guy you want matched up with Treveyon Henderson in man coverage. And Will Howard did say it was disrespectful and also unfair, which I agree with both assessments. So maybe those opportunities will not be plentiful moving forward. But I think there are other ways to get Treveyon involved as a receiver. I've always viewed him as a guy who has some slot receiver skills. Now, obviously, they're not hurting for slot receivers at Ohio State, so that's not been on display a whole lot here, which is understandable. But I think as the offense continues to evolve, as they look to add things in week to week to challenge his defenses a little bit differently, I think Treveyon might continue to see the ball come his way in the air a little bit. Like, he only had 3 targets against Purdue. I'm not talking all of a sudden he's going to get 8 targets per game kind of thing, but whether that's via the screen game or lining him up outside or whatever, the Texas route we've seen work for this offense a couple times throughout the years, I do think we'll see an uptick in that moving forward as the games get a little more meaningful. So I'll buy whatever available stock there is in that idea.
Yeah, I was going to purchase some as well. We can just start right there because I've been waiting 10 games to see this exact route. Out of the 5 practices that we saw during training camp in August, one of the plays that was burned in my mind, outside of some of the stuff that I've talked about over and over with Emeka, was Treveyon winning a route, this route, and making a contested catch down the sideline on that field right over there about 10 feet in front of me. And I thought, because it was not as open as it was against Purdue.
Yeah.
It was a much more difficult catch. And I thought, well, that's interesting. You can just stretch the field as well vertically with Treveyon through the air. Who knew? At some point, I knew this stuff was going to be added in. We've talked about using Treveyon or Quinshon Judkins in the screen game, doing some other things to get them creatively involved, putting them in the backfield together. I think that this is another element that should have certainly Northwestern's attention, but Indiana, Michigan, Oregon didn't really see it to a tremendous amount in that matchup. That's another thing that you have to account for that would not be fun.
Preparing for this offense has to suck. There's just so much they can do. Like now they're doing that. They're running Will Howard more. Like they're putting both guys on the field. Like it's a lot. And it's like we come in sometimes like they should throw the ball to Carnell Tate more. It's like, well, they don't have 1 million plays per game, but it probably feels that way when you're preparing for them. There's a lot there, which is great for Ohio State. I like the conversation about, you guys got to add stuff and save stuff. It's a long season, whatever. It's like they got dudes all over the place. They can just go out there and kind of do whatever they want sometimes, and it's a real headache for teams.
Yeah, well, they also have to be willing to sacrifice some touches, and that's a difficult conversation to have because you brought this point up earlier in the week, and even during the game on Slack on Saturday, Bill's like, this team does not play very fast. Now they can, and when they choose to and want to, it's going to be pretty successful, but I'm wondering exactly the motivation behind that because they have been burned by a lot of things, but the signals over what happened the last couple of years in Michigan, they don't seem to want to do that.
Yeah.
They've talked about playing depth and how many games. Chip Kelly said they were halfway through the season. And it's still hard to wrap your mind around that possibility for how many more games Ohio State might have to play to reach its goals. You have that involved. You're trying to build for the future and play depth at the same time to get guys ready to compete at a championship level. You don't want to show everything in your arsenal if you don't have to. Like, all these things are in the pot, and I don't know that you can assign more value to one over the other, but it's like Ohio State has sort of made this bargain with itself that it doesn't need to score 1 million points or run 80 plays to get through this year, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know that I was anticipating it. Like, I was definitely anticipating them running the ball more, which goes part and parcel with it, I think. But Ryan Day has used the term like controlling the game several times throughout the season. It's actually, not to make people angry, like I think it is kind of Michigan-like, and like in the approach of, we're going to be methodical, we're going to run our stuff, but then you're going to look up and we just put together a 13-play scoring drive, and you're asking yourself, like, where did the first quarter go? I think Ohio State, I don't know that it wants to be solely defined by that, but I think it is embracing that identity a little bit more. That said, like, a lot of teams are playing slow, and then we saw Oregon, for instance, like, I think ramp up its pace a little bit against Ohio State in a way that was difficult for Ohio State's defense, I think, to contend with. I'm waiting for the game where Chip Kelly's just like, warp speed. Here we go. Yeah, I think that, because the other thing about this team is, like, yes, they do play slow, but when they have gone fast, they've looked just as effective, perhaps like, if not more effective. So it's not like they can't do both. They're just kind of choosing to do one over the other a lot now. But I think that faster pace is definitely in there, and we'll see it at some point.
And I still think it would remain probably not the focal point of their offense, or, a literal fastball, that the notion of more complementary football overall, because you have one of the nation's best defenses, if not the best, certainly in the discussion, most talented, doing things differently, did not play great against Oregon, but like that game did get played at a faster pace, and how much did that contribute to some of the wearing down of the defense in the second half? I don't know. I can't really.
Well, they weren't getting lined up, which was a part of it. That's part of it.
Yes, that's not an offensive issue for Ohio State as much as it was Oregon putting them out of whack and getting them on their back foot. But like, I don't think Ohio State is as adamant about getting into those games or relying on, they don't want to be the reason they lose a playoff game because they got into a shootout with Georgia. Like, they don't want to relive that again. And if they are able to control the football better and take a playbook out of what the rivals did over the last couple of years while leaning on an elite defense, like that's the old school championship formula.
It is, but you also pair it with Jeremiah Smith, Book, and Carnell Tate, and then which just goes back to, like, what do you do against this team? It's like, oh man, they're playing at a pace of a service academy, and there goes Jeremiah Smith over the top of your defense. So like, they have a lot of different ways. I think they are effectively using tempo as a weapon right now, but there's the other side of that coin that I think we have not seen so much of yet that I do believe will come out later on in the season.
So how much stock would you buy in 3 down fronts, jack position, I don't know, more exotic schemes?
Yeah, I'd scoop up some. Like, I'm not going to go crazy. I'd buy more of the Treveyon Henderson receiver stuff, for instance, than I would like a 3 down front, or maybe I would not so much buy a stock in the 3 down front as maybe I buy it like in Mitchell Melton being a bigger part of the defense, because he, like we always say it about him, right? We put him on the field, things seem to happen, and I know that package of plays did not look great. I don't think it was Mitchell Melton's fault. He was like kind of right there a couple times, either pressuring a quarterback or almost getting a sack or almost getting a stop. Like I think part of the idea of doing that is to get Mitch a little more involved, because I think they have always viewed him as a guy that could make a little bit of a difference for them, and those opportunities just haven't come to fruition much unless it's more of a backup role. Although he played pretty early on against Penn State, if I remember correctly. I think he had a run stop in there pretty early on in that game. So he's a good, effective player. So I would definitely buy stock in him being a bigger part of the defense, but even a little bit of just not being so stagnant with the 4 down front. I do think, whether it was Nick Saban or us constantly asking about it, like something I think will push them to just mixing it up just that little bit. Like, it's not going to become the base defense like it was for Jim Knowles at Oklahoma State, but like I said, I don't know that we've seen the last of that. I think they'll be opportunistic about throwing that out there.
Yeah, they keep making this point about Mitchell Melton. It's like, well, this has been what has been schemed up, envisioned for him for the last 2 years, dating back to that injury. So it feels like they want that. I wonder who else could potentially be involved in that. Mitchell has obviously had some bad luck with injury. He even came off a little bit banged up on the block play. It looked like, he went back out there and obviously made plays for Ohio State after that. But like, we've thrown out a bunch of names, and the only glimpse we got at it was the jack position was those 4 plays. Like, could Caden Curry do that? Would that be an option for CJ Hicks potentially moving forward? Josh Mickens maybe. I don't know. There are other guys who could do it, and I don't know if – I think we're going to see it against Northwestern, but I wonder if we're going to see it in a different permutation, and not just with the three guys on the defensive line, but also maybe potentially could somebody else actually play the jack outside of Mitchell Melton, or is this a Melton-specific conversation?
Ryan Day did mention C.J. Hicks when talking about it, and I think we'll see it against Northwestern too. And then if it doesn't look good again, maybe we won't see it again. But if it looks better this time around, then maybe you will see it for a series against Indiana. I don't know. I don't want to get too excited about it because I could get very excited about it. But yeah, I just like the idea of finding something for Mitchell Melton to do in particular. Like I like him. I think he's a good story. I think he can help this team. So if this is the way for him to have more of an impact on the defense, like I'm for it.
Yeah.
So.
It feels like when we spent, I don't know, the entire first half of the season being capped off at Oregon and going into the off week, like wondering about same page on the staff and whose influence was here and whose was there. It does feel to me like the stock would be up on like Jim Knowles is getting to do what he wants, whether that's one call for the collective defense, whether that is more blitzing, whether that is seeing the jack on Saturday against Purdue. And it's entirely possible that we're making too much of that, and it's just something that never comes back again. Seems unlikely, but it feels like that page does belong to the defensive coordinator now in a way that I did not feel did a month ago.
Yeah, they're not – I don't know that they'll ever say that explicitly. I think you got to kind of read between the lines there a little bit with the being on the same page stuff and then seeing how they're actually calling those plays on the field, and whether it's Cody Simon or whoever, like giving one message to the entire defense, it is noticeably different. And I think in a very good way. I'm not trying to badmouth anybody or anything when I say that. It's just obviously it's very important for all the defense to be on the same page with what they're doing. And I think the last couple of weeks we've seen that. So I'd buy some stock in that too.
Yeah, there have been a number of like former players who I've talked to, and I'm like, well, because I'm just saying, well, what do you see that's different about the scheme? And I mentioned it, talked about it with Zach Bourne on Monday on the Bourne Blitz, and it's like maybe not all that different, just they're lining up. It's like, huh? Well, that seems pretty easy. That's not
the back end's not set while the defensive line is still on one knee looking for a call, right? They're all getting it at the same time. Yeah,
it doesn't seem like the most complicated scheme adjustment that you can make, but it does seem pretty effective.
Yeah.
So you can take some stock up on that. Who's a player that you might want to invest in?
That's a good question. I feel like there's some obvious ones we've talked about a lot. Is there any more like Jermaine Matthews available? They're just, it seems like they're not.
I'll share.
Okay. I'll take a little
profit on what I bought.
Okay. That's fair. I just like I think his being on the field a little earlier is different than maybe a philosophical decision to play more guys. That makes sense. Maybe I'm confusing myself there, but I just think that with some of what we saw in the Oregon game and some of the penalties maybe from Davis and Igbinosun, Ohio State seems to be a little more open-minded about not making that pure rotation at cornerback, but at least getting Jermaine Matthews on the field earlier with the starting defense. And I think that will continue because he seems to play well when he's out there, whether that's a corner or at nickel. So I think, there's the kind of core, 12 or 13 guys who are going to play, I think, when it really matters most. And it feels to me like Jermaine Matthews is pushing to get into that group.
I'm very glad that you brought him up. Yeah. I mean, it's because if you look at the cornerback group as a whole right now, we know what happened to Denzel Burke against Oregon. And we've seen consistently when Ryan Day is talking about establishing that and who you are week after week, there's no real uncertainty. You're going to get a penalty from Davis and Igbinosun.
Yeah.
Like the sample size is too large to ignore at this point. Now, are you willing to make that trade-off because of the highs that he can provide, the physicality, the edge that he plays with, the interception that he made at Penn State? You wouldn't have wanted him on the bench for that. He made a play that maybe only he makes in that situation because he has an ability to bounce back from some of his mistakes. Mm-hmm. But because you have to think about the ups and downs with both of those two guys, that has maybe opened the door for Jermaine in a way that maybe without the loss, it wouldn't have happened.
I think that's right. And whatever, like, it sucks that the loss had to happen, but I think the results of that can still be good, right? So, and I really just think not so much in this game coming up, but although I guess Northwestern got some pretty good production out of its receivers the last time it played. It's more an Indiana conversation for me. It's not even a Michigan conversation because they don't really throw the ball at all or well. But Indiana does. Indiana has some real receivers. It has a pretty talented quarterback. They're going to spread you out. They're going to put 3 receivers or 4 receivers at times on the field. I think that will be a game where Jermaine Matthews will have a role to play, and the corners will be really challenged in that game. So this is less of an immediate payoff I'm looking for in Jermaine Matthews. It's 2 games down the road, but I'll get whatever's available now before it's all out.
Yeah. Well, I have so much that it's fine to take some profit and then reinvest it in. I think I'm going to go back to August and training camp and a lot of conversations that we had, even in the summer, like position previews about the tight end. It's a collective group. And there may not be one individual standout. That's really borne itself out. Now, we thought that Jelani Thurman would probably be more of a consistent factor in that until it got, it's somewhere along the first 8 games, and it did not happen. And I know that there were, concerns and conversations about why hasn't that occurred. And we would always have to bring up the same old conversation. Well, you have to block like a left tackle, and you have to be able to go beat a safety. You have to do all the things from every position. It's a development spot. In the last 2 games, again, ultimate small sample size for that. If we're wondering why it didn't happen before then, now that it is starting to, I think we can take notice of that. He was not the primary target, and everyone made jokes about, the bar of soap and the 3 drops on 1 play. He made a catch when Ohio State had to have it. And the very next week, they go back to him in a situation, move the sticks again. Mm-hmm. So is it a ton of targets? No. Are the reps out there? Are the blocks, chances to make a play as a blocker available to him? They seem to be. Part of that is because Will Kazmarek is hurt and there is no other choice. But actually, Ohio State does have other choices. They could put Patrick Gurd on the field. They could rely exclusively on Bennett Christian and G. Scott. They could play with 1 tight end. They could do anything else. But they're choosing to start using Jelani Thurman, not in a huge amount, but just enough that you're taking notice that maybe a corner is being turned.
And I think it's obvious now that Will Howard is not afraid to throw the ball his way too, which probably helps Jelani, right? I think maybe, sometimes quarterbacks get their favorite targets or whatever, and maybe they'll think to themselves, like, I don't know if I can rely on that guy. I'll run it. I'll try to force it to somebody else. Like, no, Will Howard is perfectly comfortable throwing at the Jelani Thurman in a big high leverage kind of moment, even one they had not repped a lot apparently going into that Penn State game. So I think that should probably help Jelani realize how important he is to this operation, even if the targets aren't plentiful, as you said. When the ball does come his way, it could be at a pretty important juncture.
And he's done that with G. Scott as well. Mm-hmm. I think, I don't know if he's taken for granted or overlooked, or maybe because he's not ever fully lived up to the hype that accompanied his recruitment, whatever it is. Like the work that he's doing and the progression that he's making as a tight end, still, I would not stand here and say that it has been perfect, but when you talk about Will Howard trusting people and delivering the football to them and being willing to, that happened even back in Oregon for G. Scott. Yeah. It happened with a touchdown, that was drawn up pretty nicely by Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, and then executed by everybody involved. And G. Scott's doing that too. So I don't think that you could look at this team, and even without Will Kazmarek on the field for the last couple of weeks, and be like, the tight end was the spot that's like, is that the quote unquote weakest link of this team? Like, I don't think that has been the case, despite, not having any obvious, NFL tight end talent on the field ready for the NFL right now. Maybe Jelani Thurman becomes that. Yeah. Maybe Bennett Christian could block for a long time in the league with his physicality, but like not anybody who is right now going to have NFL draft scouts saying he needs to be out and he needs to be playing on Sundays immediately. That's I think a tribute to that group.
They've already gotten more out of that position group than I thought they would this year. Not to say whatever happens from here is icing on the cake, because now that that's happened, it's like, okay, so what's that meme? Like all of a sudden I became important at work today kind of thing. Not that like those guys prepare themselves well. I'm not saying they don't, but now it is a feature of the offense. I think that they're going to draw up stuff for that position. And I think for the most part, they've responded. Just got to keep doing it. But they've been, I was pretty out, I think, on how good I thought that position group could be this year. And they've exceeded my expectations, no doubt.
Yeah. Tribute to them. Where else would you like to invest? You don't have to.
I would just say quickly, like maybe in some more special teams creativity moving forward.
Ohio State has realized that they should.
Yeah, I can't decide if this is what they're going to do moving forward, or if they just like knew Purdue stinks, so they're going to just go after it. And whatever, it worked. It's fine. You play an overmatched opponent, you should do it. We saw Oregon ran a fake punt against Maryland for no reason other than they probably just thought they could do it because Maryland's not very good. So that's okay if that's what the case was. But I guess I'm willing to entertain the idea that it was something more than that. That Ryan Day, I think, one, agreed with the assessment that special teams has not been a plus for them, and two, was pretty angry about it and wants it to be different now moving forward. So I don't know what it's going to look like. Maybe it's another pump block somewhere down the road in the key spot. Maybe they got a fake, in their back pocket that they're going to pull out at an opportune moment. But I will buy stock in the idea that was not the last splash special teams play we'll see from this team.
Oh, so you're back into the predicting a punt return or kickoff return for a touchdown market, huh? Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that because that's not like yes, you have to do that, but that's not like, all right, we're going to call the punt return touchdown play now, right? It's like that'd be great if that happens. I think it's more of a block or a fake or some kind of weird onside kick situation, or even something like Dan Lanning got a free first down by just lining up weird and got Michigan to line up over their center. Like maybe it's something like that too. I don't know.
Yeah, creativity does help. That's what the realignment and reconfiguration of the coaching staff was supposed to provide, right? I mean, that's you want to see the outcome of that. We had not for 8-9 games for Ohio State. If you're starting to, good. They also, when it comes to the return game, Treveyon Henderson has returned. He returned a kickoff against Purdue. We've seen Caleb Downs getting involved in punt return. They're changing personnel, not just with punt block. Even when it comes to the return game, clearly Ohio State is still looking for some solution there.
They put Denzel Burke out there, right? To jam the gunner.
Yeah, they've used starters in ways. And Denzel Burke has covered kickoffs as well, in other situations. I don't think he did against Purdue. I think Aaron Scott might have been out there, but either way, they are shuffling up those groups and not just standing pat. They know they've got to make something happen. It's a waste if you don't. It has cost this team yards, possessions. You can't continue to let that happen.
I think it's a good tool too to kind of keep guys locked in. It's like, hey, we're going to work on this cool fake punt all week. You better play well enough to put us in a position to actually use it. It can be a little bit of a carrot stick situation with special teams sometimes too.
Nothing better.
Who doesn't love a carrot?
That's right. I don't know. I don't like.
Yeah,
carrot.
They're actually not great.
I don't like carrot cake either.
I can take it or leave it.
Stock down on carrots, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Okay.
But stock up on sticks. They can motivate too. Ending it with special teams and some vegetable weirdness. That's what happens on the Stock Watch. Thanks for joining us on the podcast daily on a Wednesday edition. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later on Wednesday night with some snap judgments after the Buckeyes have another practice to get ready for Northwestern at Wrigley Field on Saturday. Talk to you then.